Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we put on our feet. We are here at the round table. We have Dr. Matthew Klein, Dr. David Salas, and I'll be kind of hosting and facilitating. I'm Nathan Brown, excited to be together with these guys again. It's always fun to get together and chat. We are doing our monthly Mailbag episode today. The questions just continue to seem to get a little bit deeper, a little bit more intense, and they are very specific to people. So as we always say with these are not medical advice. These are educational discussions about clinical scenarios. So if you have a medical condition or you're having pain that requires the help of a medical professional or a PT, do not take our advice as that medical advice. Go see somebody. But Matt and David, it's good to be with you both. I remember when I first shaved my head, you both made fun of me, one, and then you both started coming up with people that I look like. And I had a friend, after I saw them today, they texted me this, and they're like, "This is you today." Stanley Tucci. Can you guys see it? Yeah. Stanley Tucci in the white. Oh, you can't really see it well.
I can see it. Yeah.
But they said I'm really channeling my inner Stanley Tucci.
That's okay. Yeah.
I have my next Halloween costume, I think.
Sweet.
Why is that so bright?
There you go.
But if you're on YouTube, you should be able to see a little bit of what's going on there. But I got my white button up today. Got my Koros. He's got a much fancier watch on. But
it's
maybe
like
I am just Stanley Tucci.
I'm pretty sure in the DOR employment packet says you have to be able to take and dish out being made fun of. So just FYI.
Yeah, I love how he opened up with that, where he's like, "Yeah, once I did it, you guys just immediately made fun of me." It's like, great.
We did our job. This is good.
Yeah. But I also
how long ago was that? It's been
how long has it been now?
I shaved it in August of 23, so maybe 6 months or so.
September. 7 months actually, because that's actually when Isabella was born.
Yeah, 7 months.
Yeah, that's right. Okay,
7 months. Yeah.
Wow.
So it feels normal for sure at this point.
Yeah, I kind of forgot that wasn't your normal for a second, at least not for the last 7 months.
Yeah. Well,
looks good. I think it looks good.
Thank you. I also know that's not why people listen to the podcast. So we should probably move forward. So we are going to be doing a mid-year roundup of best shoes of 2024 so far, but we are a couple months in here, and I just want to get a take from you all. And this is our subjective question of the day. What has been a shoe? It doesn't need to be new. It could be one from last year's model, but what has been your favorite daily trainer of the year so far? A shoe that you've loved just getting miles on and kind of using for your bulk mileage, kind of if you had to have one shoe in your arsenal to just kind of put in all of the grunt miles, what would it be? So what has it been so far for you both? David, why don't you start?
Yeah, there's three that immediately come to mind. And so traditionally through this first, I guess you could say quarter of the year, since we're approaching April now, the Puma Deviate Nitro, oh my goodness, I can't ever get Puma names right. Velocity, there we go. The Puma Velocity Nitro 3 and the Saucony Ride 17 have been two workhorses of mine. I think I have 100 on both of them. But one that recently came to us is the On Cloud Monster Hyper. I just barely got this shoe, and I put 25 on it in 2 days, and I'm loving it. So I'm hoping, we can get more mileage on it soon. Obviously, we have a lot of shoes we got to review, and so that may or may not happen sooner versus later. But really liking what I'm doing so far in that shoe.
Are those three, you kind of have those three. Are they similar, or do they all hit?
No, very different.
Yeah. So what is it about each that makes you like that one more than another?
Yeah, I would say the Ride and I almost said Deviate again, and the Velocity are more similar in the group of the three there, but they're still different. Like the Velocity Nitro kind of is like, it reminds me a lot of like what the Pegasus kind of used to feel like, or
that's interesting.
Or like the Asics Cumulus,
like that.
Or just kind of like that neutral high drop trainer. But that Nitro foam just softens it just a little bit, but it's like a very neutral, very basic design that kind of feels timeless. It feels like that just running shoe. And it's nothing super exciting, but it grips the ground well, and I don't know, the transitions are smooth for me. And so it's one of those shoes where I could just go log a lot of miles on and not really think about it. And it probably could turn over pretty well if I really pushed it. But I mean, for daily miles, I've been really liking that shoe. And the Saucony Ride 17, a little bit more balanced. You have a little bit more rounding in the heel, a little bit of a earlier kind of toe spring, but it still kind of gives you a little bit more of a flatter kind of natural transition through that toe off, where it doesn't feel like it's hyper rockered. And there's still a little bit of flexibility, and the Power On Plus midsole can take a beating as well. So it's another one of those shoes. As I've broken it in more, so the first couple runs, it kind of felt a little bit slappy, but once I broke it in, it's done really well for me. And I was a big fan of the previous Saucony Ride as well, and so this is another shoe that just kind of continues. Yeah, and I liked the Velocity too. I remember it didn't make any awards for me, but I do remember liking it. And the Cloud Monster Hyper, it's like what I've wanted one of these high stack rocker shoes to be, where it feels so. For those that don't know, the Cloud Monster Hyper is a continuation on the Cloud Monster, but there are a couple of differences. And the biggest difference is that they're putting that Helion HF foam in there, which is a super foam. And that's the foam that they use in the Cloud Boom Echo 3, I mean, per their website. And that's kind of the main slab of it on the inside. And then it's surrounded by this Cloud Tech, the firmer foam that On usually uses. And it kind of encases it like around the heel, and it comes down. Do I have it right here? I do. Let me just grab it. Just for like visualization, because I feel like it's kind of hard to say it. Yeah. So that orange is all Cloud Tech. And there's a lot of it, and it just kind of wraps around. And this white slab is that Helion HF. And it goes all the way through to the front. And then it gives you kind of like, in a weird way, almost like a medial posts kind of, right? Like, so it just gives you a little bit of guidance, but it has that bounce from the PIBA-based midsole on the inside as well. And so it's just a nice rhythmic ride that actually gives you a decent little bounce on the front of it. For a high stack rockered shoe. So I kind of throw this in that quote unquote super trainer category. And it's one of the few super trainers I feel like that I can compare to the Super Blast, that like this could very easily be a shoe that I pound miles on, but it's still early to tell. It's hard to say anything on a durability standpoint, but for right now, that shoe is really, really nice. But I literally just got this thing the other day, right? But I have 25 on it already.
And I know you said it's a kind of continuation of the Cloud Monster. It's a different shoe in the same family. They're still doing the Cloud Monster
too, yeah.
I also, it kind of, the way you described it and showed it, that's a shoe that I don't have, but it kind of reminded me of the Spectre in some ways, where it had that casing and then the inner core, more bouncy, like softer than the Spectre, or is it still kind of firm? Or
it's still pretty firm.
It's pretty firm.
It's still pretty firm.
It's an odd shoe.
Like, it's an odd shoe in that like it feels firm. Like it doesn't feel like the foam's very compliant at all.
It's not like the Cloud Surfer, because the Cloud Surfer.
No, not even close. No. Yeah. Okay. But it still has a bounce, and it still feels cushioned. Like you stand in the shoe and you're like, oh, I got foam under me. It's that weird kind of.
It's a 40 millimeter heel, right? 6 millimeter drop, 40-34, right? Am I correct on
6 millimeter, yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sweet. So you got 3. I'll say mine quick, because as y'all, if you've been following, you know that I've been kind of coming back to running since the ligament tear in my foot. And so I've really been picky with what I run in. I have not been experimenting much. So the 2 shoes that I've been putting the majority of my miles in since I've been a little bit more consistent have been the Endorphin Speed 4 and the Mach 6. And those are 2 pretty different shoes as well from each other. In the Mach 6, you have a supercritical EVA foam, but it's like firmer. There's no plate, but it is a little bit stiff. There is a decent amount of stiffness actually. Whereas the Endorphin Speed 4 feels much higher, much less connected to the ground, a little bit more rockered, and has that P-Bax plate in there. But they've both just been really nice at all paces for me, which all paces basically means just easy paces. I've only done a very small amount of workouts at this point, because I am trying to return to running consistently since the tear, but those have been good. And the big problem for me with the Mach at first was it was so tight. So the volume was so low, and it felt unnecessary. Like not even just like, oh, this will feel great, it'll lock you in. It was like, why? Like, why is this so snug? It has loosened for me for sure. another component was it was too cold to wear my thin socks at first when I had the shoe, and now I can wear my like thinnest summer socks, and I can wear them that. But I tried to put on. It got cold again around here, and we got like 6 more inches of snow last week. But
it doesn't get cold over there.
Yeah,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Don't know what you're talking about. Dang, I still have my bubble thing. Anyway, I put, if you are watching YouTube, you know what we're talking about. If you're not, sorry. But now I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, I tried to put those socks on, my winter socks, and I just couldn't. I couldn't run in the mock then because it was just too low volume. So they have a wide version. I have requested it to see if I could test it out and see kind of what the differences are. So I might be able to report back. But those have been the two that I've been consistent with. I was running in the new Cumulus for a little while, which I thought was nice, much more refined than the previous version. But I'm not someone who beats up outsoles, and they moved to a foam, like rubberized foam outsole, and it's been tearing up on me. And I'm like, this kind of ruins the idea of a workhorse trainer. Meanwhile, the Mach 6 went from a rubberized EVA outsole to you have the actual rubber.
Right.
So it's almost like once I got the Mach 6, I just pushed the Cumulus to the side because I just knew it wasn't gonna last as long for me. And it was just more comfortable on the bottom of my foot for the Mach right now. So those are the two that I'm running in. And, again, I'm running easy paces, and both of those, despite them being geared towards some workout stuff, have been good for easy paces, which is nice.
Some of those new Hoka outsoles are pretty nice. Mm-hmm. Same on the Cielo X1. I see it behind you, Matt. How does your heel look? I'm just curious.
Oh, wrong one.
Get the left one.
I'm very, very curious.
Oh, it's
gone. All right, it's gone.
But that's a glue issue, not a rubber wearing out.
Yeah,
issue,
the rubber.
Right?
That was just me because where they placed it, I knew I land and scuff right there. I'm like, I'm gonna rip this off, and I can't say it's necessarily a durability issue because I think most people with normal mechanics that aren't me would be totally fine, to be honest. But that's just me. So
yeah, because that's one of the few super shoe outsoles I feel like can take a beating.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Matt, what about you?
I've got some. We doing favorites overall, or just stuff that we're running in right now? What
daily trainer.
Daily trainer. Okay. So first one, I got to give a shout out to the new Topo Ultrafly 5 has actually quickly become a favorite. The previous Ultraflies have just been slightly too firm. I'm like, I can appreciate this, and it was a shoe that I actually suggested to a lot of people as a walking shoe that need a wide toe box and stability. This is the first one of these that I've actually really enjoyed running in. They soften the sole just enough to make it really comfortable. It is very stable. Still one of the rare shoes that has a medial post and a really nice heel clip, really nice toe box, really good overall. So I'm really enjoying mileage, long runs in it. My only issue is I am just ripping through the outsole a little bit more than normal, which I might be wrong. I suspect just because when you soften things, especially soles and outsoles, they tend to start at wear a little bit quicker, but I haven't really it hasn't changed the feel, but I'm really enjoying this shoe. It's very, very comfortable. The combination, Topo's just doing great. They're doing an awesome job moving their product forwards. Like Nathan, the Speed 4 from Saucony is still on my feet. I am really, really, really enjoying that shoe. I've got well over 100 miles on my pair, and it's just something that I can consistently trust, especially for long runs, and it's been really, really fun. The Cloud Monster Hyper, I'm kind of with David. I've got about 20 miles on my pair. I appreciate it, but I'm still putting it on this list because I'm doing a ton of miles in it. But I feel like we haven't figured each other out. My first run, it was oddly stiff. Feels like it fits almost a half size long. And now did 13 miles on it this morning, a long run with Isabella. And yeah, like David said, what I do appreciate about it is the way it's set up. It's definitely stable neutral. It's stiff to the way the Helion and the Helion HF is set up. It actually makes it feel kind of very guided and very centered, which is really, really nice. It's just I'm very surprised. If you told me there was a plate in this, I would totally believe you because it's really
right. Yeah,
stiff.
There's no speedboard.
Yeah, there's no speedboard, but it's very stiff. And this being just a tiny bit long makes it just a little more stiffer for me, but it's actually warmed up really nice. As a training shoe, I did a workout and it just doesn't feel like I can access some of the faster paces, but as kind of that super trainer, I'm really enjoying it. It does kind of remind me of the Super Blast, but Super Blast still is getting the nod over this one at the moment, but I'll get more miles and see. But I did enjoy it today. So those are kind of my big three just at the moment that I'm oddly enjoying or having like a kind of weird standoffish running moment with. I don't know how to describe that. But yeah.
Nice. Cool. Well, let's hear from y'all as well. So if you are listening to this on YouTube, you can comment below with kind of your favorite training shoe right now. Again, it doesn't have to be new. I'm a big fan of having deals from year-old models that are on sale now. So drop what you got below. On that note, we are again having a giveaway thanks to Running Warehouse. So if you do comment on the YouTube video for this podcast, which release on Sundays, you will be entered to win a $100 gift card from Running Warehouse. So excited to be able to give another one of those away. We're loving that partnership, and it's been a fun way to connect with you all and hear your responses to this. I know that that's our subjective for the day, but because we're doing our mailbag, we always call out for more mailbag type questions. We have so much to potentially cover. As you may have heard, my solo episode a couple weeks ago was on, we were kind of started these kind of research reviews or a topic based on research articles that are all talking about the same realm. Y'all gave a ton of things that you want to hear from the literature about. So we are also pulling from those comments from that to kind of potentially fill out our mailbag or have some more research related questions that we dive into the literature with and the research that has come out on the topic. But let's move into our mailbag for the week. We have a lot of questions. We'll see what we get through. There's a couple questions that are both about stress fractures and stress reactions, which are related to our bones and our bones. We call them bone stress injuries. So it's not like you fell from 20 feet and then you fractured your bone. It's repetitive stress on a bone over time that leads to breakdown of either the casing on the outside of the bone or into the cortex of the bone itself. So here's our first question from a longtime follower of ours, from Max. And this is some details that he shared with us. So he's been struggling on and off with some frustrating niggles and injuries since he completed the 2023 New York City Marathon. Congrats. I've heard that's a super fun race to run. And was feeling amazing until all of a sudden this past Monday had an intense heel pain during a run, and it appears to be a stress fracture upon initial analysis by a podiatrist. I'm beyond bummed, but eager to find out the best way to rest, recover, and do whatever it takes to injury-proof myself from this moving forward. So he's interested on our guidance and thanks us for considering taking the time to talk about it. So what I see this question as is kind of multifaceted. What does it mean to recover from a bone stress injury? And then how do you prevent this stuff from coming back? So Matt, do you want to open us up and talking about either one of those two realms?
Yeah. Although this is something that Nathan could definitely speak to, but I can also speak to it. We had a great conversation with Rich Willie. If you haven't heard that episode, I'd really, really encourage you, because Rich is one of like the premier kind of PT researchers on bone stress stuff. So I really encourage you to do that. But here's the thing about bone stress injuries is that you can't rush them. It's one of the few that, like, we talk about like tendons and stuff like, oh, they still need load, right? You need to push them. Like, you have to be careful and that stuff. Like muscle, oh, you got to keep it working. Stuff like that. Bone has a fairly strict timeline, and sometimes that can be even longer. You can't push those things. They take a long time to remodel. Do you need to load them eventually? Yes, but you need to be careful. So jumping in early is the worst thing you can do. So a lot of the stuff when coming back, normally we tell you, oh, don't worry about, pain, it's relative. That's one of the times where pain is actually something you really want to pay attention to. And a good, slow return to run program that includes like a walk run is actually really helpful for exposing your body to this after you've waited the 6 to 8 weeks at least. And Nathan, David, correct me if I'm wrong in terms of I see different timelines depending on who you ask, but 6 to 8 weeks has been kind of something I've gone by of, hey, non-weight bearing activities, like letting the tissue heal, making sure you're on top of you, because nutrition's really important. I'm not pointing fingers or anything. Rich, one of the things that he comments is like, if you're in a carbohydrate deficit, you're already immediately leaching stuff from your bones. So good carbohydrate, good protein, good fat, good balanced diet, good appropriate micronutrients, like, in terms of calcium, vitamin D, all really important to taking a well-rounded approach to rehabbing bone stress injuries. But Max, to answer your question, you have to be patient. You have to be willing to take that time to let the bone remodel, doing some other activities to let that heal, and then slowly run your way back. Because like I said, bone takes time. It might be really helpful to work with a physical therapist, a runner who has experience with this. But also another good thing would be to work with a dietitian to try to optimize this, because bones just take time, right? There's a lot going on in your bones. There's not only different kinds of red and white blood cells, so a lot of your blood is created in there, but it's also the cortex and how things are set up. Just takes a while. So you got to respect tissue healing timelines and ease your way back in.
David, what do you have to add?
Yeah, I think Matt hit it pretty well here. But one thing I always tell people, for better or worse, bone is still a living tissue. It's constantly shaving bone away. It's constantly adding new bone. That's something that's happening regardless of whether or not there's a fracture there. However, if there truly is a fracture in the bone, one of the worst things you can do is go put a whole bunch of weight through it. Like, it doesn't respond well to that. Like you said, you need to have some patience. There's a reason why they put you in a boot and sometimes even crutches, and they say, as best you can, don't put too much pressure through there. But on the other side of that question, what can I do in the meantime? You can do as much non-weight bearing strengthening as you possibly can. I mean, you can do all kinds of lower leg banded exercises, side lying hip raises, banded clams, whatever, you can still get quite a bit of work in. And then that also is a great opportunity to work on a lot of the postural musculature too in the upper quarter as well, because running isn't just lower quarter. I know runners don't like to hear that, but you need to have a stable core and stable shoulders too. If you can't stabilize here, then you're going to start doing things like this. So it's a good opportunity to slow down, kind of look at where your impairments are and work on them, and just be patient over those 6 to 8 weeks. That's usually the same timelines we function on. If there truly is a fracture, thankfully we have x-ray on site where I work, and we can take a quick look, see, all right, so it's fractured. Let's give you this amount of time. We'll check back then. Okay, it looks pretty stable. Let's get you waning out of the boot, and we'll kind of work towards doing things. And it could be even longer till we're even doing like body weight loaded plantar flexor exercises. Calf raises can take a minute to get back to. So I would think,
and by a minute you mean like weeks.
Much longer than a minute. The metaphorical minute. So it can take a while, and it can be a long process, and it can be frustrating, right? Like, you want to get back to running. Sometimes the bone injuries, in a way, they're easy because they're simplistic in the way that it's like, okay, wait, it'll heal, you'll get better. But they're almost harder in the fact that there's so much patience that has to get exercised during that time period. Where, like, with tendinous injuries, it's like, okay, well, let's see what that load tolerance is for the tendon. Let's load it up and let's get you back, right? Eccentric, plyometric, like that progression can be a little bit quicker sometimes. Whereas bone, you can't rush it. You just can't.
Not even the jumping you have to be careful with. I think
exactly.
Rich just posted a study they did where it was like actually landing softer increases stress into the bone, which is so interesting because you have more shock absorption from the muscle that pulls.
And that's another, that's another aspect of bone loading is that tensile force that your muscles put on it, where it's pulling on it, right? So bone is just such a dynamic structure, even though it's static, like in a weird way. Like, the structure itself is there. It's not doing too much, but there's so much around it that makes it a dynamic structure.
I think David hit that on the head with, like, I think it's an opportunity. Like, oftentimes in running, we don't really want to stop and address all the little things. Like, no, I just want to get my miles in. This is a really good opportunity to look and go, you know what? For my health and for my future running, I need to stop, and I need to start really investing in what things make me better. Like, stop thinking about the right now, or even the next year, going, what race am I going to do? Going, what is this going to look like 20, 30 years from now? Like, what can I do to keep, and just, it's a learning opportunity. And Nathan, you can speak to this, far, far better than me, given that you experienced one not too long ago. And David, also, you've had your share of stress related injuries as well. So you two know, I've had one a long time ago, but that's because I was an idiot running 150 miles a week. So that's my fault.
Yeah, I think y'all have said such great, just had a lot of good things to say here. I think if we zoom out, a little bit further to, every bone stress injury is a little bit different. There are some regions of the body which are considered low risk bone stress injuries. There are ones that are high risk bone stress injuries, and it depends on what type of service you're on. So the ones that handle compressive forces and the tensile loading from the muscles themselves, like the distal tibia, those are like the lower risk ones. The second and third metatarsal, those are lower risk. And then some of these other ones that are happening because of the tension force from the bending of the bone, those are really high risk. And if you have, and that's like the femur, like the anterior surface of the femur would be an example for that, and the proximal tibia, or like proximal meaning like closer to the knee, like those ones that are in those higher risk zones are probably going to have a longer recover period than those who are in the lower risk zones. So I think just another thing is like, get your friends who have walked through this and get their experience, but also understand that your journey might be a little bit different. It might be a little bit more expedited, or it might be slower. And as y'all referenced, when we think about tendons and that kind of recovery, it's awesome because there's a lot you can do. There's a lot you can do for the structure that needs to be healing itself. And it's like, oh, my Achilles tendon has a tendinopathy. I'm going to do a loading program to my Achilles. This is amazing. I can do stuff that makes me feel like I'm progressing towards healing this specific structure. And as y'all referenced, when it comes to bone, the acceptable amount of pain with exercise is 0 out of 10. If it is more than a 0 out of 10, you're not allowing the bone to heal.
And this isn't just us saying this, by the way. This is like evidence-based clinical practice guidelines, like how you're supposed to progress this, which I know because of Nathan shared them with me, by the way.
So I think that's really hard. And I went through something similar this last year with my ligament, where it's like, you can't load the ligament to heal it. I had to just offload it for basically like 6 months, and I'm still not out of the weeds. Like this week, I've been upping my mileage a little bit. My foot's starting to like speak to me again. So this week I'm jumping on the elliptigo, and I'm going to have kind of a down week of like loading just to like let things resettle. But it can be really frustrating. But I think understanding, and this is why it's working with somebody who understands bone stress injuries and the sport that you're in is super important. Let them help guide you, because it's going to be hard to trust yourself at times, because it's going to feel like it's never going to get better. But you got to have somebody else who can kind of speak the truth about the healing time frame and what's going to come through. So that's one of those things that I would kind of add on to everything they all have said. But otherwise, I think you hit it really well. And I was going to hit the same thing that David said, where it's like, if you have a bone stress injury and it means you can have 0 out of 10 pain, and then you take that to be like, I'm going to do nothing, that's going to make every other bone in your body more susceptible to a future bone stress injury. So do all of the single leg loading that you want as well on that uninvolved limb. Yes, you will probably have some more asymmetry between your sides, but do as much non-weight bearing strengthening as you can on that involved side. There's lots of ways to I would just encourage you not to neglect the other parts of your body that aren't injured. That would be like my biggest thing for you long-term, is so that when you do come back, you're not starting from ground zero everywhere. It's just that one area that hasn't been able to be loaded in that specific way. I do also think that the best way to help maintain some sort of cardiovascular fitness is probably going to be deep water running, which means your foot isn't touching the ground in the deep water. But, and there's, like we said, pain tolerance is 0. There might be a period where you can't even do that just because of the muscle contractions or repetitive motion or whatever. And it sucks, but that'll be part of the journey. But I think that would be one of my recommendations, to try out some deep water stuff and get friendly with the pool.
Another thing that might be helpful, I just was looking at this the other day, because this is an interest of mine. There's stuff called blood flow restriction training, which please do this with a professional. Don't do this stuff where you grab a strap and that stuff. I've seen so many nerve issue problems related to that. So if you have access to somebody who does blood flow restriction training, that can be a great way to maintain muscle mass, and there's improving evidence on using that with bone stress injuries to maintain muscular strength and size and stuff like that. But what's really cool, by the way, Nathan mentioned like go to town on the uninvolved limb. You still get benefit on the involved limb without doing anything on it. It's about approximately 10% benefit for all you do on the other side. So why not stay moving, but just do it in a way that allows you to heal? It doesn't mean you just sit on your couch and don't do anything. It means it's part of working on being adaptable, and it's really hard, and runners are bad at it, but it's a good skill to work on.
Yeah. Great. Well, we have one more question about stress fractures, and it's a very different situation because this one is a parent reaching out about their kid who is 15. And so he's a son who's 15, loves to run distance, runs cross country and track, and he has his times here. The kid's pretty fast too, running sub 16 for the 5K, which is super fun. Awesome. Sophomore. So again, a younger individual.
Really fast.
That's
awesome. He's cruising.
I saw that earlier. It's awesome.
So, and again, I think that the world where we will take this conversation is general conversation about youth athletes and bone stress injuries, and not specific here. But this person came out and has multiple bone stress injuries, has looks like a stress fracture of the distal tibia on the left, but also a couple stress-related injuries on both feet down in the ankles and foot. So multiple bone stress injuries. The first thing I'm going to say is that I think we had a conversation about this as well with Andrea on the podcast, where we talked about youth athletics. And so we should probably have our episodes memorized, but believe it or not, we don't. But in that conversation, we talked about the difference in types of injuries between youth athletes and masters athletes and how they change as we get older. When we are young, the most common type of running related injury are bone related. They are the most susceptible thing. So something like this is not surprising. When I have one of the high school kids who I'm working with, if they come in, I am very high on my radar for screening for bone stress injuries. If they're early in their pain, I'm not putting fear in their minds about it, but it's in my mind. And I'm considering, how do we manage this as a younger athlete? However, when I have somebody who's like 50 or 60 come in who I'm working with, my mind goes to what's going on maybe with the tendons and the soft tissue related injuries, because that's a pretty clear distinction in the literature. Kids and younger skeletally immature people are going to be getting more bone related injuries, whereas those who are older are going to get soft tissue stuff. So that was kind of the first distinction that came out, is this isn't surprising. I'm really sorry that he's walking through this. It's going to be a little bit of a journey, but also he's 15, going to heal super fast and get things figured out.
Must be nice.
What other to heal fast as a 15-year-old?
Yeah. It's gone, right? We're in 30s. It's gone.
Yeah, it's fine. So what else I have a couple other things that I thought about with this question, but what sort of thoughts and considerations do you have for youth athletics and bone stress injuries? Matt, go ahead.
David, go first, because you actually have more experience than I do with this, so go for it.
Oh, no, I just think two things. So you hit it right on the nail. I feel like when you're young, a lot of bone injuries happen. There's a lot of changes, right? You're growing, there's puberty, there's a lot of hormonal differences. The bones are literally lengthening underneath you, right? Like, we're having a lot of osteoblastic activity, just meaning that it's creating bone, right? And the body isn't skeletally mature yet. So that's one consideration off the bat. The other consideration that ties into this, when you go into high school athletics, and this person's a sophomore, right? Mm-hmm. They're probably up in their mileage, and they're probably doing more than they've ever done. This is me speaking out loud. I don't know what their training looks like. I'm not blaming the coach or anything. Yeah. But just generally speaking, usually if you're running sub 16 as a freshman, or sophomore, chances are you're running with the varsity team, unless you're on a absolutely stacked team.
Right.
And you're probably running a considerably large amount more than you ever have prior to that. And so I think one thing that I think with youth athletics is just being really careful about overtraining. Mm-hmm. And not even overtraining per se. Maybe it's not true overtraining, but overreaching, where it's like you're just going a little bit beyond your means. And then if you do that, and then you kind of come back, and then you hit a baseline, and then you kind of come back up, and you kind of scale that line up, there's nothing really wrong with that. But if it's this chronic overreaching where it becomes overtraining, I think that's a slippery slope that in youth athletics can really go the wrong way fast. And especially with youth athletics, there's also, like I said, the hormonal changes, but that also happens psychologically. I feel like kids are so motivated to be good, right? Mm-hmm. They want to be as good as they possibly can. And they might have college on their minds. They might be like, if I can run this fast, I can get a scholarship and go to college, right?
Right.
And so there's additional pressures on there to kind of set aside thoughts about pain or what you're feeling in your body. And I think where I'm going with this is to just be careful with the overreaching, with the overtraining, and just to like listen to your body. If it's telling you to kind of take a break and chill out a little bit, I would voice that. You're growing. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I did a long run in high school and I was asleep on the couch for the next 3 hours, where it's like, and that's a big thing too, sleep. And that kind of transitions into my second point there. My other consideration is when I hear about things, regardless of age, on both sides of the body, different body parts, in this case, it's both feet and one ankle, right? Or one tibia.
Yep.
That kind of raises some systemic flags for me. That's not just the running at that point, I don't think. I feel like Matt talked about this earlier, but like making sure that you eat enough, because bone health really pulls a lot from your vitamin intake, from the amount of food you're intaking. Like it's, like I said, it's a living tissue, it's constantly making more and shaving some away. So you want to make sure that system is doing well. And if that system is kind of constantly in a state where it's kind of overreaching, you're asking for a reaction or a fracture. And I feel a little bit harsh saying that, but this is coming from someone that's had multiple down there, And so I think taking a step back and kind of looking at like, okay, like I said, another opportunity, right? Where what can I do to prevent this in the future? I have the fracture. I can't do anything about it right now. All I got to do is just let it heal, work on what I can work on, and then scale up from there. And truth be told, in the long run, 6 to 8 weeks isn't that long in the span of your life.
Yes, very short.
So it feels like a long time in the moment, and it can feel a heck of a lot longer if you rush it and you re-hurt yourself.
Yeah.
So
it feels long because sometimes it's like a season is gone.
Right.
Like in that season of life, it's like I lost a year of track, or I lost a year. And so it feels so big. It feels so big.
But I think taking care of those little things, because when I hear about it in two different sides, technically two different body parts between the tibia and the foot there, like I said, it just raises systemic flags to me. And so it's like, get your sleep, eat, take care of yourself. I don't know what this person's pressures are, whether it's grades or training or how bad they quote unquote want something. Like, I don't know where they are in that place.
Yeah.
But I think just doing the little things to take care of yourself might even be bigger than any kind of physical load or training in, as far as the next 2 years of your high school career go.
Yeah. If I could revert back for a second to the previous question, and it applies here too, but I meant to say this in terms of the opportunities and kind of what to do to prevent in the future. I'm going to give another callback to that Rich Willie episode where we talked about bone stress injuries. He talked a lot about his research with ultra runners, and he gave some parameters for how much of two types of training you should do for bone health. One of them is very heavy lifting, like not like a 50-pound kettlebell, like double leg as heavy as you can.
Yep.
And then the second is plyometric work. So those two things can provide the right stimulus for actual bone growth and generation.
Not while you have these fractures, by the way.
Not while you have the fracture.
Right?
Correct.
Just to clarify.
This is
not
the
tendons. You got to wait. Yeah.
This is the long term, like when you're back, how do you prevent it from coming again? There's two ways to include exercise, and it's going to be those two Wow, now I have balloons.
That's new. You have balloons.
How did I do that? I don't know what I just did, but that was amazing. Okay.
Happy birthday.
Coming back to this question, I want to just double down on that part about making sure you're eating enough. I think with the high school athletes that I've seen, many of them have benefited from seeing a sports dietitian and getting their blood drawn and checking levels of their iron and like all of these other things, because if that's off, you can do so many things right, and it's still not going to get you where you need to be. So if you have the means and the resources to go get a blood draw and get everything checked out to see kind of what all of your levels are at, I highly, highly recommend it in working with a sports dietitian, because there's two things that can really help with reducing risk of injuries. And in youth athletics with bone stress injuries, one of them is the right nutrition. And they even looked at like a cup of milk and how much 1 cup of milk a day decreases bone stress injury in youth athletes. It's outrageous. It's very high. The second thing is sport specialization. So I don't know what this athlete is doing, but like, you're obviously a very talented runner. I would say I would call it an imperative to participate in like a pickup, even ultimate frisbee league or like intramural basketball or soccer, like somewhere where you are for like 8 weeks of the year, not running as your primary mode of exercise and training. Like that's not where your hard stuff comes up. Get in a level 1 sport where you are cutting, and it doesn't need to be official with your school. Like just find an outlet where you can participate in that for an off season of your running. That is a huge part of decreasing injury risk, like 70 to 80% decrease of bone stress injuries for those kids who participate in sport special, or who do not participate in sport specialization, meaning that they are doing something else for at least 2 months out of the year, if not 3. So that'd be my other thing, is like put in some sport specialization and make sure that you have enough the right nutrition, which will probably take some guidance from a sports dietitian. Matt, do you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to get people aware of the fact that you notice that we really haven't brought shoes up in this conversation, right? Like there's a priority list of things. Same thing that I kind of teach my students. Like, there are certain things that when you're talking about certain pathologies, those are the biggest priorities, right? Shoes don't protect us as much as they claim to. Like even the maximal shoes, we found that there's actually sometimes more like joint stress with those because you actually land harder. So you got to take care of a lot of stuff before you even think about getting shoes. And I encourage you, just getting the right pair of shoes is going to be the end goal later on. Don't even worry about that. Really prioritize nutrition, because the other thing about high school like athletes is high schoolers often don't really realize, especially athletes, don't understand how many calories they're burning. Like just like their basic metabolism is already incredibly high. Then you add running like 10 plus miles a day on top of that, like the caloric intake is really high. And as soon as you drop below that, what your kind of basic levels, one of the first tissues you're going to pull from is your bones, right? That's one of the first areas. So in terms of longevity, this is a really great lesson to go, if I want to participate in the sports, yes, I need to think about it as a high school athlete. If you've already got the speed, you're running sub 16 as a high schooler. Like that's awesome. If you're thinking about college stuff like that, do the long game. You're not having to like do extra stuff. You think the long game, right? But in part of that long game is going, how do you optimize your nutrition to fuel yourself? How do you optimize your training to get the most out of who you are? And more miles, as David said, isn't necessarily better. Some people do worse with more miles. Some people do better. You have to figure out what your body can tolerate, because the only way you're going to get better is if you're healthy. If you keep getting injured, that's going to interrupt it, right? Which sounds like it might be happening. So finding that optimal level with nutrition, your training, stuff like that, is kind of the best way to think long term. Have the long game mindset, because it's what's gonna give you the most success, especially as a high school athlete. Because I mean, not to scare you, like you start talking about bone stress injuries, getting into that distal area, right? Like you're still growing, like that growth plate, those growth plates are right there. That was my
first thought.
So you want to be a little. I'm not trying to scare you, but just optimize that nutrition, optimize your training. Think a little bit more about being multi-sport. This might be really helpful, because going to college on a scholarship is really important. This country, college is expensive, right? People get really, it's scary. Oh, how am I going to pay for college, stuff like that? But I think you don't have to worry about that much. You're already running some blazing fast times. Think the long game of taking care of your body too, and the performance will come when you've optimized those things.
It's really hard to convince high schoolers of this, but the statistics show for most sports that those who sport specialize do not perform as well as people who are sport diverse in doing many different sports. So yes, you are eventually going to need to specialize, but as you are growing up, you should do so much, because you'll actually be better. You'll actually perform better at your sport when you specialize, or when you do not specialize too early on.
Can I use an anecdote of something personally?
Sure.
So I don't know, for those that listen, that my wife is, my wife's a professional runner. She ran professionally for Salomon, for Skechers. She's run on a national level. She actually was a multi-sport athlete until her junior year. Like she did basketball, she did soccer, she did all kinds of stuff. And she didn't really get serious into running until junior-ish, late junior, almost senior year. And then she got a full ride to Oregon State, which was too much. Being away from home was too much for her. So then she transferred back to Cal Poly Pomona on a full scholarship. But, it's that sport specialization thing really is true. It's something that people ask us with our daughter, Isabella, going, oh, are you going to make her a pro runner? No, I want her to stay away from running for as long as possible. If she likes it later, she can do it. But, that evidence is pretty clear. Enjoy the multi-sport. Be a kid. Have fun. It'll make you better.
Yeah. And that goes to parents too.
Yeah.
Let your kids have fun.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to move on to our next topic within these mailbag questions. This one is from the Anime Runner. So I'm going to summarize. This is a longer email, but I'm going to summarize it for us a little bit. So they're a flat-footed runner, has worn stability shoes for a long time. Recently has been doing more stable neutral shoes with sidewalls. And they basically are saying that they'll put in a really hard effort. They're racing in the Hyperion Max. They ran a 34:37 10K in the Hyperion Max. So
that's
really
great.
Really great time.
Yeah.
Which they say is stable enough for them. But what they're noticing is after those really hard workouts, they notice a trend where after these races, they have severe arch pain after they race in these kinds of things. So, and they're saying last year they ran 2,000 miles in the Tempest, in the Glycerin GTS 20, and in the Clifton 9. But the problem is that they're having is that after these races for, even 10 days or so, they're still having, even regardless of the shoe that they wear, they're still having sharp pain. So what sort of recommendations or thoughts do we have for this person? And how would you conceptualize what they're experiencing? Matt, you have thoughts. I can tell from your face.
I do. This does not serve as medical advice, and you need to actually go get checked out. But I want the two of you to hear me out, right? So history of like some posterior tibialis fatigue, right? The kind of need, so foot arch being a little bit lower, right? Needing some stability shoes in the past. Things really bugging them more after the race. So doesn't sound like it's during the race. It's more afterwards, right? Something under the ball of the foot kind of making me think like maybe some insertional post-tib tendinopathy kind of thing. Like, is this even shoe related? What do you think? I might be totally wrong. I'm not diagnosing. I'm just going, this is smelling a little tendon.
I think when I first read this, I kind of thought like, not to minimize this in any way, but the idea of like, well, you just raced, so things might not be super comfortable. Yeah. And in that realm, there's a couple of potential things that lie in that area. It's like, maybe that thing is problematic, and you just don't stress it enough until you put in that max effort. And then it takes a couple of weeks to recover from races. That's just kind of reality. Things, our bodies don't just bounce back in a day like they did when we're 15, right? So, I was kind of in a similar camp. But again, not trying to diagnose this situation, but just thinking like, this seems kind of like an expected result where I don't think it's something that whatever shoe you're racing in is the problem. I think it's more related to the effort and demand that's put on the body. And then your body is recovering over that period of time. But because of how severe it is, it's probably worth checking it out with somebody who could do a deeper diagnosis and probably have it checked out when it's irritated. Because if it's one of those things that's never there until you race hard, it's going to be hard to do a clinical diagnosis on something like that. Yeah. David, what do you think?
Can I add something really quick?
Go for it.
It'll go into David. I think people kind of forget how much racing takes out of you when you're doing it really hard. Like, it's kind of the same thing. Nathan mentioned like, oh, you haven't, sometimes you haven't stressed yourself out enough to really know that things are irritable. Like, I'll give a little behind the scenes thing of my research on masters runners. When I was looking at master runners who did and did not have Achilles tendinopathy, I found their sub-maximal, like their normal easy pace running mechanics were not any different. There was no difference whatsoever. It wasn't until I really started to stress them, making them do stuff like maximal single leg hops, things they hadn't done, they really started to push, that I started to see some of those differences. And so racing is where that comes out. You're putting it all on the table. And David knows this better than Nathan and I, because the efforts that you've done recently, like your recent marathon, the 5K stuff, you're running at such high intensities. People don't recognize it's a lot of stress in the body, and some stuff hurting's not abnormal, and it just means you need some time to recover. Yeah. David, you can speak to that better than us. Like, what hurts when you finish?
Yeah, everything. I mean, but I hear what you guys are saying, but there's also a part of me that like, why is it expected? Right? You train for a race, right? Like, you should be able to recover from one.
I should maybe clarify, like, it's not surprising, but it shouldn't be expected. Like, it's not like if somebody has like a tendon issue or some sort of like thing that needs to be worked on, it's not surprising that it only bugs you after a hard effort, kind of regardless of what shoes you'd wear. So, but yes, keep going. I like where you're going with it. So.
FYI, tendons, the most stress you can put on them is doing like really hard, fast efforts. So,
totally. Yeah. And I agree completely. And I think you guys both kind of meshed what I was thinking.
Yeah.
In a much nicer way of saying it.
That's not
but there's a common saying, practice like you play.
Yeah.
And I feel like I don't know what this person's training looks like, but it's like I'm fine for these 2,000 other miles. It's only when I go fast. It's like, well, maybe we should go fast a little bit more frequently.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
adapt.
Create some adaptations. Yeah. If you're sore after a 5K in your calves for a couple of days, you just ran a hard 5K. But if you're out of commission for a couple of weeks, you're not adapted to run that race in my mind.
That's very true.
You know, like you run, but you're not like training. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think just creating some of those environments where your leg is getting loaded in a way where it's either speed driven, plyometric driven, or just loaded in a way where you're working on the intrinsic foot muscles, that tibialis posterior, so that it doesn't give out on you.
Yep.
And I agree completely. When I first read this question and heard the question the second time when you had said it, I'm not hearing that this is a shoe issue.
Yeah.
Right? This is not, it doesn't matter what shoe it is. You do just fine in all the other shoes. It's when you go fast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, okay, so now let's take a step back and look at this. And it's like, okay, so every time I go fast, this happens. Okay. When I go fast at a certain pace, does this happen? When I go fast for a certain distance, does this happen? Is this a fatigue issue? Yeah. And is it a fatigue or a power issue or both? You know, and it's like, that's going to take a little bit more work and kind of unwinding it and looking at it. But the root of this, I believe, is probably not necessarily from a mechanical flat foot and or a shoe issue. This sounds like an adaptive strength, power, endurance side of things and a conditioning issue.
Yeah. I think that potentially being flat-footed might put you, it's like being high arch versus flat foot. That's going to put you at risk for different things. One is not better than the other. However, having that plus it sounds like this tissue might need to get loaded. And I think David brings up a great point is like, well, the fun things to think about is, hey, when does this get worse? Or does it different versus a short, hard race versus a long, hard race? Like, are those different things that might be something, it's either an endurance issue or a power strength issue, being able to figure that out. And then also going, hey, what tissue is this? But it sounds like, it doesn't sound like a shoe issue. It sounds like a tissue issue. So it might be very helpful. Yeah, I like that. It might be really helpful to go work with a running PT or some kind of running clinician to go, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. Can you do an exam or evaluation to go kind of look at this? Like luckily you're still able to run and race, but I think this might be a good thing to take care of if you know it's taking that long and if it's bothering you. But I think the three of us are going, this doesn't sound like a shoe issue. This sounds like, I'm going to use that again, a tissue issue. Great.
Okay, we have.
Can we make it like that's a new podcast?
Get a little
like
badge
the
thing.
Tissue
issue, and it kind of just like
a sting.
Shoes are tools
on
and
the
tissue
screen.
issue. I like that.
I wonder if I can make my screen make a tissue issue. Oh, there's my thumbs up.
Well,
all
your
right.
screen liked it, so we should do this.
Okay. So we have one more question for the night. It also pertains to flat feet. I'm going to ask their question, and then I'm going to ask you a different question, and then we'll come back to their question. So it says, so this is from Michael, and he says, hey guys, I have flat feet, but respond better to a neutral shoe.
Yep.
The only thing is that I hate the feeling of my arch touching the sidewall. Any recommendations on trainers without an aggressive arch? Yep. So let's get to the recommendations in a minute. Let's hit pause though and talk about that concept of matching foot type to shoe type. Yep. What do we know about that? Who wants to take it?
It doesn't work. It's there's been some
I already knew that was going to happen.
Shoot that one down. Yeah. It doesn't typically work as well as we would like. And we know this because it's not just a couple anecdotal things. There's some huge military studies that have looked at this and found no different in injury rates or even sometimes even comfort. So what we've found over time that getting comfort is better, or matching your history. We know that people with a history of certain pathologies like posterior tibialis issues or Achilles sometimes do better with stability shoes. But if you haven't had that issue and you feel fine and you've got quote unquote flat feet, which is just describes an anatomical position, not a pathology, or if you pronate and you feel better in neutral shoes, just put the neutral shoes on. The whole like wet paper tests, or even I'm going to shoot this down because I hear this all the time. The static foot scanners that you see in different places that take it like, oh, your arch looks like this. They're not accurate. They're not valid. They're not reliable. They're not accurate because it's not watching you in motion, and it doesn't take into account what you prefer and actually what's comfortable on your feet.
Yeah.
So those are just flashy tools to try to sell you something to keep you entertained. Okay. Sorry, I'm being mean, but it's what it is. Sorry, based on all the current clinical like evidence. So if you do well in a neutral shoe and you pronate, go enjoy your run.
So now let's go back to this person's question, which is basically, I like neutral shoes. They're on board with that. Cool. But they don't like the sidewall feeling, which I get. I understand that. There's plenty of people who I know who basically wear, it's like, I call it the Clifton blister. And I love the Clifton, but like midfoot, it's right on the midfoot. So I'm just picturing him wearing a Clifton and being like, I get this blister on my midfoot. But what shoe recommendations do we have that don't have an aggressive kind of sidewall at the area of the arch? What do we got?
Dude, one of the first shoes that came to my mind, which has actually been really popular, is the Ghost Max. From Books has been one that has a very low arch because the insole is actually designed to take orthotics, and there's no real major sidewall here. That's one of the first ones that came to my mind, and it's not too controlling either. That's something I don't know what everybody else thinks, but that was the first one that came to my mind.
I have a question for both of you because I didn't run in the most recent round of Salomon road shoes, but I know that the Salomon Ultra Glide 2 on the trail did not have an aggressive kind of sidewall through the midfoot. How were
they had a little one?
They had the road ones.
Ultra Glide?
Yeah, the Ultra Glide. Yeah, has
Ultra Glide's the trail.
Oh no! What's the Aeroglide?
Aeroglide.
Right? Aeroglide.
That one had a little one too.
Yeah, it had a little.
That
one.
was just curious. I was just wondering. Y'all.
I didn't feel like it made things more stable, but it's still there. So maybe
they might feel it.
Yeah, you might feel that.
Okay,
but arch wasn't too high. Like if you're talking about like the insole and stuff like that, arch wasn't too high in a lot of the Salomon shoes. That might be an option actually. But Ghost Max was my immediate thought on that.
Yeah,
one.
That's a good one.
But I would have said the. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the Saucony
Ride.
Not the Ride. What's their orthotic? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Andrew and Corey, you're gonna hate me. Why am I blanking on this?
Omni.
Not Omni. They're stable neutral. I loved it so much.
Oh wait, stable neutral.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Why am I forgetting this?
Oh, this is bad.
Daily Trainer?
We'll get to it. David, why don't you talk and we'll come back to this.
It's tough because a lot of the shoes that are coming out now do have a gentle sidewall.
Yeah, it's very common.
Say Hoka can be a little bit aggressive on that one sometimes, and I get it. Like as far as like Echelon. That irritation there.
Yes.
Oh, the Echelon.
Echelon is not a good option because it actually has massive sidewalls, which is why it works so well for me. But the arch is low, so for this individual, but goes back. But
I'd say some of the
Andrea, Corey, I'm sorry.
I'd say some of the quote unquote like traditional like high drop neutral shoes, a lot of them don't have big sidewalls. So like the Ghost doesn't really have a big one. I almost said deviate again, man. The Velocity Nitro 3 doesn't really have a big one.
880.
880. Yeah, I mean, it's like really gentle. The Ride is pretty small too. But a lot of those ones, they don't really have a big one. They're aimed at being neutral, right? So they might have a tiny bit of guidance, but they don't really put a whole lot into it. And they're not that classic high stack, I say classic, but it's not classic, but the high stack rockered ride that we're seeing from a lot of shoes that are coming out, where they're putting these sidewalls in to kind of help give you a little bit of guidance because there's just so much foam under you and kind of keep you centered. So looking at some of those more quote unquote traditional designs that we've seen with the neutral trainers before this giant resurgence of like high stack rocker shoes. Those shoes usually aren't too bad on the sidewalls. Mizuno Wave Rider being another one that comes to mind.
That's a great option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us on this episode. If you could be so kind to take the next 30 seconds to go on to wherever you listen to this podcast and give us a rating and a small review, that really helps increase the reach of this podcast, which just increases our ability to do it and kind of continue to spend the time making this stuff, because we have a lot of fun doing it and we hope that it's beneficial for you all. And again, if you want to enter the giveaway, after you kind of leave those reviews of the podcast, you can go on and comment on YouTube and that will enter you into the giveaway. If you want to check out other stuff, you can go to doctorsofrunning.com. You can also follow us on pretty much every social at Doctors of Running. And we hope you all have a great day, whatever you're up to.